Hi guys, so today, obviously I am not here, so I'm going to go over the basics of what we're doing. Now, the good thing is we're going to go over the same stuff in class again tomorrow, or next class period. So if this is tough right now, it's okay, we will have more time to work on it. But what we're going to do today is going to combine a lot of things that we've already done together, and that's the only thing that's going to make it kind of tough. So what we're going to do is we're going to find all of the roots of a polynomial. So what we've done already was we found all of our what's called rational roots. So rational roots would be any of your whole numbers or your fractions, or something that could be written as a fraction. So an example of a rational number would be like 1/3, -2, 0.5. Those are all rational numbers. And those are the ones that we had last class that we were able to take the root and write the factor from it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to find the other ones that are irrational. So irrational numbers are something like the square root of 7, 1 plus the square root of 3. Okay, those numbers that you get from Quadratic Formula, those are your irrational numbers. And then imaginary, if you remember, those are the square root of negative numbers, and those are the ones that are in terms of I. So like 2i or 3 minus 4i. Those are imaginary numbers. Now there is a theorem that you can actually use to find what the possible rational zeros are. If you're going into pre-cal, you'll probably look at this a little bit more, but we are not going to worry about this for today. We will probably talk about this more next class because there's some other ways that we can use it. And just to start, I want to go and show you guys some other ways. So when it comes to finding zeros, what makes it hard is that there are multiple different methods that you can use. So you have to pick what method works best for you and what works best for the problem that you have. Okay, so always you can, if a problem can be factored, that's a great place to start, especially if you're good with factoring. All right, now what we're going to do though, we're going to start in your homework today, we're going to use this one the most where you're given a factor. Okay, and the other one we're going to look at a lot is where we are going to graph on a calculator. So the first example that we're going to do, this is going to look very similar to what your homework does. Okay, so what this is telling us, it gives us this polynomial, okay? And it tells us what one of the factors is. It says x plus 1 is one of our factors. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug in, we're going to do synthetic division, okay? And we're going to do this so that we can find what our other zeros are. So -1 is the number that's going to go in the box in the top left. Because remember, if I'm dividing by x plus 1, it's the opposite sign. Then I write the coefficients of all those numbers. So 1, -1, -5, 3, and 6. So with synthetic division, you bring down the first number, you multiply by what's in the box, and you add down the column. So you multiply by what's in the box, add down the column, multiply, add, multiply, and add. Now, for these problems, you're going to get 0 as a remainder, and that's a good thing. Okay, if you get 0 as a remainder, okay, that means that -1 is one of, the number in the box here is one of your roots, okay, which we already knew because it told us, but there'll be some extra work we do later. So for my roots, one of my roots we know is -1. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the remaining polynomial. Okay, so this started as x to the 4th. So remember with synthetic division, your answer, you start 1 degree lower. So this would be 1x to the 3rd minus 2x squared minus 3x plus 6. And again, the remainder is 0, so we don't need to worry about it. So now we can look and see if this is something that we can factor, okay, or we can solve it another way. But this one, it actually is going to factor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor this by grouping. So cut it in half. X squared comes out. I'm left with x minus 2. Minus 3 comes out. I'm left with x minus 2. Your parentheses match. And then I get x minus 2. Okay, so those are my factors. But what I want to find are the roots. So one of these we did pretty easily yesterday in class. So if x minus 2 is a factor, 2 is one of my roots. The harder one to find is what roots go with x squared minus 3. So we are going to actually solve x squared minus 3 equals 0. Okay, so what I would do is I would add 3 to both sides. I can take my square root, and remember when you take a square root, it is plus or minus. So my other 2 roots are positive square root of 3 and negative square root of 3. So this is the process you're going to use for a lot of the assignment that you have. So you're going to start, there's a certain factor it's going to give you. You put the opposite number in the box. Okay, you write the coefficients of the polynomial and then do synthetic division. Once you get done, you look at the answer that you have and you can either factor it, or if it's quadratic, you can use quadratic formula. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple more examples, but this is the basic process that you're going to do today. All right, so let's start with this one here. X to the 4th minus 5x squared minus 36. Now, if you want, you can factor this to find all of your answers, but I want to show you some of those calculator ways to kind of help if you're having trouble. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and graph this. So x to the 4th minus 5x squared minus 36. So I graphed that. Now, remember we talked about how there are, because this is 4th degree, there are going to be 4 solutions. But if you look at your graph, there's only 2 on the graph. What that means is that 2 of those solutions are real and 2 of those solutions are imaginary. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start by finding the real solutions. So to find my roots, I'm going to do gsolve, root, and there's my first root, negative 3. Then I'm going to scroll to the right, and my other root is 3. Okay, so I know what 2 of my roots are. Okay, so 2 of my roots are 3 and negative 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do synthetic division like we did on the last problem. So 3 is going to go in the box, and then I'm going to do synthetic division. So my first coefficient's 1. Remember, I have to put 0 in because there's 0x to the 3rd, then negative 5, then 0 because there's 0 x's, and then negative 36. Bring down your first number, multiply and add, multiply and add. And what's nice about these, because we know 3 is a root, we know we're going to get 0 as a remainder. If you don't get 0 as a remainder, you probably made a little mistake somewhere in your division, so go back and double check. Now what's different about this one, again, we started with x to the 4th, so now this would be x to the 3rd. Okay, but that's not going to be enough to find our answers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my other root, which is negative 3. So I'm going to do synthetic division again with the same numbers that I got as my answer. So we'll do synthetic division again. And I get 0 as a remainder. So now I started with 4th degree, then I went to 3rd degree, so now I'm down to a 2nd degree, so it's quadratic. So now what I have is x squared plus 4. So all I have to do now is just solve that. So I get x squared equals negative 4. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 4. Remember, a negative in the square root is an I outside of the square root, and the square root of 4 is just 2. So this was 4th degree, and there were 4 answers. 3, negative 3, 2i, and negative 2i. And those are your 4 answers. All right, so let's try the next one. Okay, we're going to do this one a similar way. We're going to check our calculator to find our roots to start. Okay, so I'm going to type in that polynomial. So that one is x to the 3rd minus 4x squared, and I'm in the minus 7x plus 10. So I'm going to graph it. I'm going to gsolve to find my roots. So my first root is negative 2. My second root is 1. And my last root is 5. So on this one, you actually don't have to show your synthetic division. On this one, you just found all your roots using the calculator. So we only need to go through that synthetic division process if we get roots that aren't real or we have roots that aren't rational. Okay, but in this case, it's third degree, and we should have 3 roots. And if you look, we had 3 roots. Okay, we had 5, 1, and -2. All right, so let's try another one. So this one also can be factored. If you remember, this is your scums pattern. Okay, if you really can't remember scums, you can graph it, and you'll notice on your graph that this is going to have 1 root. Okay, but let me go ahead and do our scums just to review. So I would cube root both of those. Square the first, change the sign, multiply, square the last. Okay, again, if you graphed this, you would see that 2 was one of your roots. Okay, so if you wanted to, you could do 2 with synthetic division, and you would end up with this same answer there at the end of your synthetic division. Okay, this is just a little bit faster. Okay, so what I would do now, I need to find all of my roots. Okay, so there's going to be 3 roots because it's third degree. So I need to look at this polynomial. Okay, and that polynomial is quadratic. I can't factor it, so I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this is going to be -2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4ac all over 2 times 1. And we can simplify this from here. If you are struggling with quadratic formula, okay, yes, you can use the calculator, but you need to remember a couple things if you use the calculator. There is no plus or minus button, okay, so you have to start with plus, and just remember it's going to be plus or minus. The other thing you need to remember if you're using the calculator is that you have to turn on that complex mode if you are dealing with some of these negative numbers, okay? So let's go ahead and type this one in. Okay, so again, that complex mode, if you don't remember how to do that, so you're going to go back to your run matrix, and I'm going to do shift menu, okay, and then I'm going to scroll down, and right now yours probably says real, so when it says complex mode, you're going to select F2 where it says A plus BI, okay, so A plus BI, so it starts with real. A plus BI is going to give you those complex answers. Okay, so now I'm going to plug this in. So I have -2 plus the square root of 2 squared minus 4ac, and that's over 2a. Okay, and again, remember, the calculator only gives you the plus. It's plus or minus. So your values here, you would have -1, that's a highlighter, not a pen, -1 plus or minus, and that was 3i, I believe, or square root of 3i. So again, 3 answers, -1 plus the square root of 3i, -1 minus the square root of 3i, and 2. 2 you could have gotten from the calculator. All right, we're going to look at one last one. All right, so to start on this one, we are going to go ahead and graph this, okay? Again, we're going to graph to find some of our roots to start. Today on the homework, though, it's going to give you a specific factor to start with to help you, okay? But this one, let's go ahead and graph it so we can find some of our roots. So I'm going to go to my graph. I'm going to type in that equation. All right, and let's look at our graph. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So if you can see, we need 4 roots, and there are 4 roots on here, but here's the problem. So when I go to my GSolve and I do my roots, my first root is -2. So that one we can use, okay? The second root, though, is a really ugly decimal, and we don't know what that decimal is. Okay, so we're going to have to work to find what that one is. 0.5 is a root, and that's a good one because, again, that's a rational number. We can come up with a factor from that. Okay, but again, this one is an ugly decimal. Okay, so the ones that are good. Okay, so the roots that I'm going to write down are the roots that I can get a factor from. Okay, so one of those roots was 1/2. All right, and then my other root was -2. Okay, so if I wanted to write the factors, again, this is what we did last class. Those factors, so our factors would be x plus 2 and x minus 1/2, but remember we would rewrite that, we'd multiply by 2 and get 2x minus 1. So those are the factors. So what we're going to do now that we know these roots, we're going to do synthetic division. So -2 goes in the box. I write my coefficients, bring down the first, multiply and add. I get 0 as a remainder. So -2, that shows that -2 is a 0. Then we do synthetic division again. Same numbers, but this time we're going to use 1/2 in the box. So I bring down 2. And I get 0 as a remainder. Okay, we started with 4th degree, so this answer is 3rd degree, so this answer is 2nd degree. So this is 2x squared minus 4. So that is my other factor. So if you needed to write your other factor, it would be 2x squared minus 4. If you wanted to take the GCF out, you could, but again, that's kind of what your factor is. But now we need to solve it to get those other two roots and see what that ugly decimal actually is. So set this equal to 0. So 2x squared equals 4. X squared equals 2. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2. So those are your other two answers. Okay, so again, my roots are 1/2, -2, positive root 2, and negative root 2. All right, now again, we are going to have another day in class to work on this, so don't be really worried if you're having a lot of trouble. We will have more time to practice. Look back at the first example to really help you with the assignment for today, and that's very similar to what you're doing.